After the murder of George Floyd, white people across America looked around and said, wait a second, are we racist? So America took a good hard look at itself, and when big corporations saw themselves in the mirror, they said, oh, shit, we're white as f***.
Inequality in corporate America. There are only 5 black CEOs running Fortune 500 companies.
You can see 6% of top executives as black. In terms of the population of the United States, it should be 13%.
In a video, Nike said, don't pretend there's not a problem in America. Critics point out that all of Nike's executives are white.
That's right. The board of Nike was so white, they were all wearing New Balance.
And I think that this is absolutely ridiculous because, of course, these DEI programs only came about to promote actual equality, not to try and give people a hand up or a leg up that they did not deserve, but to promote equality. And guess who the biggest beneficiaries of these programs have been? White women, which is why I do not understand why I am not seeing more white women up in arms about this. Now, if you don't believe me that white women are the biggest beneficiaries of DEI programs, literally, I invite you to Google. I will help you, though, by showing you an article from Forbes entitled, Who Benefits from Diversity and Inclusion Efforts? Now, this is an article speaking specifically about corporate DEI programs, but if you look up affirmative action on universities, you will find the exact same thing, that white women are the biggest beneficiaries. I will point your attention to this paragraph in particular. While many white women have made gains in American workplaces, the gains for racial and ethnic minority women haven't been as significant. According to another McKinsey study, white women hold nearly 19% of all C-suite positions, while racial and ethnic minority women only hold 4%. Overall, white women have benefited disproportionately from corporate DEI efforts. And if you just stop and think about it logically for a second, it would make all the sense in the world why white women would be the biggest beneficiaries of these programs. Because why did these programs get invented? Why did we decide to start promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion? Why did we need affirmative action? Because in all of these spaces, in colleges, in universities, in corporations, the only people at the top were white men, okay? The only people even allowed in to universities and many corporations were white men. So as we were thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we were thinking about it with regards to race and gender. Now, if all of the systems are benefiting white men first, and they slowly have to let other people come in, other non-white men, who are they going to let in first? Let's just think about, let's just be logical, folks. White women, okay? Obviously.
Multiculturalism is an insistence that the particular cultures found among less fortunate groups are not to be blamed for disparities in income or education or crime rates, but are on net positive.
Yes.
Close quote. Explain that.
You can't find any fault with any group that is less fortunate. There are no behaviors that they need to change in order to advance. Society needs to accept them as they are. In other words, the causes are to remain the same, but the effects are to change. And if the effects don't change, then it's society's fault.
No, but it's fascinating that I see this happening in all sorts of issues, from Federal Reserve policies on across the board, that you say, here's this wonderful program, and it will do wonderful things. And the burden of proof is on others to show that it will not do those things. And no matter how long it's been going on.
It's not long enough.
It's never long enough. If it failed, there just wasn't enough commitment. The budget wasn't big enough, should have had a larger staff, wider powers. But there is never any sense of a burden of proof on you to say, when you've made this change that has caused such furor in this country and has gotten people at each other's throats, including people who have been allies in the past, such as blacks and the Jews, there is never any sense of a need for you to advance the empirical evidence to support what you've been doing.
Oh, on the contrary, Dr. Sal, I'm perfectly willing to have other people collect empirical evidence. That's not my bag. But I'm perfectly happy to subject the affirmative action policies to reasonable statistical evaluation, given a sufficient period.
Well, what is a sufficient? Because you said for a bit, and now we're talking about a sufficient period, and I have difficulty with these. What temporal units are we talking about?
I would say
centuries,
I would
decades?
think of 20 to 25 years.
stereotypes. So yes, it puts these things in the forefront of our minds, and that's not necessarily a good thing.
Researchers looked at 800 companies after mandatory DEI trainings. 5 years later, no increase in diversity of hiring. Companies actually saw a 9% fall in how many black women were hired.
It's one thing to say they don't work. It's another thing to say they make things worse, right? You would think that people would see that data and change their minds or change their methodologies or something like that. It's not about that, though.
Data doesn't seem to have much to do with it.
No, it's not. It doesn't have much to do with it. It's not about data. It's not really about material change, right? It's about a power grab. It's about a culture change.
And they're winning, it seems to me.
They're winning in certain contexts, yes. They seem to be winning in my field anyway, of rhetoric and composition.
Academia.
Yeah, yes, especially the humanities, social sciences, things like that. And now more and more the sciences, medicine even, but I don't think it's that bad there.
Why isn't it that bad?
I think those fields are more steeped in reason, scientific method. The barriers of idiocy, if you will, are thicker there already.
But I just saw all these medical students reciting privilege messages.
We recognize inequities built by past and present traumas rooted in white supremacy, colonialism, the gender binary, ableism, and all forms of oppression.
Yeah, that's happening. I think a lot of this is performance as well. A lot of this is what people call virtue signaling. That virtue signaling is reaching, theatrical proportions right now.
What made you think something was wrong?
Well, I thought something was wrong for a while. I didn't realize how wrong it was until 2019, when a keynote address at the primary conference for my field, college composition and communication.
Melt the steel bars of racism and white language supremacy.
The keynote argued that, among other things, teaching standard English to students of color, particularly black students, is inherently racist.
If you use a single standard to grade your students' languaging, you engage in racism.
It's racist to teach black kids standard English. That perpetuates white supremacy.
Yes, that's the idea, right? And even the presence of white professors is a problem. That does some kind of psychic harm to students of color. So I heard that, thought it was a bit misguided, and said so on a listserv in my field. The Writing Program Administrators listserv. I put it out there basically in a long-form way asking, is this really a good idea? Is this the best way to go about this? And what ensued was hardly a conversation. It was more like a social media mobbing session.
You wrote, I'm concerned that the current leadership will have you believe that teaching standard English experiences tyranny by our black and brown co-eds.
Yes, so what they're saying is that to have students of color, especially black students who are descendants of slaves and things like that, to, on top of everything, force them to speak in a way that isn't their language, or write more appropriately in a language that isn't theirs, is inherently oppressive. The idea is that if you learn one dialect, you're replacing another. There's no idea that you're adding a dialect to your repertoire of dialects. That's not a possibility. It has to be rendered as some kind of oppressor-oppressed dichotomy.
An external locus of control, that's the technical term. You may have encountered this in your psychology classes. If you believe that your life is governed by external forces, you allow yourself to believe that, you're much more likely to be ineffectual, depressed, anxious, and hopeless. Okay, so that's not a great outcome because you don't succeed, plus you're miserable and you have no happiness. And those are separable things, right? And so, whereas if you have an internal locus of control and you believe that you're an active agent in the construction of your own destiny, then you obviously have to take on more responsibility, but you have a lot more hope and you're much less likely to be depressed and anxious, and you're more likely to be effectual and successful. And the victim-victimizer narrative is an external locus of control narrative. It's like, You can't succeed. The cards are stacked against you by evil, malevolent people who perhaps were even around before you were born. There's nothing you can do. Well, and then if you do fail, it's because of these, forces that are arrayed against you. And of course, there is some corruption in the systems, and there has been racism and ethnic bias. And so there's some of that criticism that's true. But as a comprehensive explanatory framework, it's the victim-victimizer narrative that turns the world into enmity.
Let me say this. I believe that what progressives are doing to minority communities, Black and Hispanic, that is criminal. And part of it is that they really do want to overthrow, traditional institutions, and the crime and the dysfunctional behavior that you find in the Black community. Progressives excuse it. They encourage it. And so they're really using people's misery. Even with the LGBTQ community, they're using people's misery to advance a political goal. I don't think they care anything about any of the groups that they claim to represent.
The truth about DEI is that although it's well-intentioned, it's mostly garbage, okay? It's kind of like the Black Little Mermaid. Just because racists hate it doesn't mean it's good. And you know I'm right, because every one of you has sat through one of those diversity training sessions and thought, this is some bullshit. And it's not just you. Over 900 studies have shown that DEI programs don't make the workplace better for minorities. In fact, it can actually make things worse.
I don't want to feel obligated to do certain things, but for certain people who have been oppressed, suppressed, and forgotten, we need our jobs. We need equal rights. What's your stance on that?
I don't care about DE&I. I've said in op-eds in Time Magazine, Black Enterprise, and Fortune, you want to kill it, kill it. It's already been weaponized. It's been made political and emotional, and it's dead. DE&I as a program is effectively dead. I don't care about DE&I. I love diversity, and I love math because it doesn't have an opinion, and God has a sense of humor.
Right.
So for the first time in history, this country cannot succeed without all of us. In 1950, America was 90% white. Not 1850, Cam. 1950. Today, America's 40% Black and brown. Within 10 years, there'll be a majority of minorities. The biggest economy in the world, the U.S. First of all, you never had a superpower that wasn't the economic power at the same time. In the history of the world, Rome, France, Germany, you never had a superpower that wasn't economic. So we're the superpower, we're the economic power. And 70% of the U.S. economy, about $29 trillion, is consumer spending. That's you and me, going to restaurants, going to lunch, playing video games, buying our phones. That's consumer spending. Or the plane tickets that we bought. That's us. The future of this economy, you cannot, my rich friends eat my poor friends do better if only to stay rich. Even the racist wins when Black people succeed going forward because GDP rises. We're having the wrong argument. In fact, we're arguing. There's no need to argue. There's not enough college-educated, successful white men to drive GDP, gross domestic product, for the next 20 years. So unless my white friends want to be speaking Mandarin in 20 years, meaning Chinese, or taken over by Russia, which is not likely, but unless you want to be speaking another language, we better figure out in the next 5 or 10 years that we're better together. So this is what's happening now is fear. This is a third Reconstruction. First Reconstruction was after Lincoln and Frederick Douglass created freedom, and the Freedmen's Bank, by the way. And then what was that? Lincoln assassinated. Then here comes the pushback to Reconstruction within 2 years. 40 Acres and a Mule was reversed. People don't know that. Here comes Dr. King. Kennedy, Johnson, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He gets assassinated in 68. Within 2 years, here comes Nixon, conservative Republican. Obama, George Floyd's murder. Here comes a pushback. It's fear. But this time is different because what I just said, all the diverse companies are the most profitable, Cam.
Right.
All the diverse regions are the most profitable. This ultimately is a country that's a capitalist democracy. This is about money. So as soon as everybody calms down and gets over their emotions, they're going to realize they actually need us to succeed. That's our moment. What we need is a black Jewish business plan. Black people need a business plan, an economic, non-emotional business plan, not dissimilar from what Jews created for themselves as a group of people who have been hunted all around the world and disrespected. But nobody messes with them now. There's only 15 million Jews in the world of 8 billion. They have their own country. They followed the money, the economics.